Order, order. Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee on Monday the 29th of June 2026. Millions of people across the UK experience permanent or temporary circumstances that prevent them from engaging with the three essential services for modern daily life: water, energy and broadband. The regulators of these three services, Ofgem and Ofcom, have statutory duties to protect or further the interest of consumers, including those in vulnerable financial circumstances. The NAO's report on this subject found that these regulators had made progress in clarifying expectations how far companies should support their consumers in vulnerable financial circumstances. However, as we all know, significant challenges still remain, with consumer debt to water and energy companies reaching a staggering £7.2 billion in March 25, and many consumers still find it difficult to contact their company in the event that something goes wrong. So today we're very fortunate to have with us a panel of real expert witnesses with a huge wealth of knowledge and experience working in these industries or with customers in these industries ahead of questioning government officials later this afternoon. We will be asking them what they think the barriers and challenges are to those vulnerable customers in financial circumstances engaging with water, energy, broadband services, amongst a number of other key issues. And we are very pleased to have, as I say, a very experienced panel this afternoon. I'm going to ask them to introduce each of themselves. Martin, would you like to start with you in the centre, and then either your left and right as well?
I'm Martin Lewis, founder of the MoneySavingExpert and founder of the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute.
Very pleased to have you. Thank you very much. Anne Pardo, please.
I'm Anne Pardo. I'm Head of Policy at Citizens Advice.
Thank you. Finally, by no means least, Ali Bell.
I'm Ali Bell, and I am Director of Communications and Policy at the Consumer Council for Water, CCW.
Very good. Well, great to have you all with us. And I think to start us off, Catherine would like to start us off, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, all three of you, for being here. At the risk of asking a question that is so broad, where do you start? I think I'll go to you first, Martin, of where do you think the biggest challenges are for customers within the water, energy and broadband sectors at the moment, in your opinion?
I think there's still a huge amount of confusion, both for vulnerable people and non-vulnerable people across all of the different sectors. Some of that is caused by regulation, some of that is caused by external circumstances, some of that is caused by the way that companies operate. I have to say, I do think the situation is better than it was when I've done these things 15 years ago. I think there's been some improvement in behaviour and improvement in trust. An example of that would be 15 years ago, I would never have told people to contact their company when they're in trouble, because, in energy sector specifically, because I thought that they would behave as bad actors, and often did, and there was data on that. I think on that area it has changed, and I think that vulnerable customer activity has improved. But we have, I'll just do a brief bit on each. We have the energy market, where we have what was meant to be a backstop tariff for vulnerable customers that is now 60% of the population are on it, the energy price cap. That energy price cap is operating on a time lag. So the fact that the Middle East conflict started in March and we saw worldwide wholesale rates rise in March is only going to hit people's bills on the 1st of July. It will continue to hit people's bills in October and possibly next January. At the same time, fixes are getting cheaper. So you have a duality of market, one that's based on a 5-month time lag and one that's based on instantaneous wholesale prices. Vulnerable people can't and don't take advantage of the potential to fix right now. People who are on prepayment meters, there is no competition. So Ofgem rightly has made prepayment cheaper for those who are on price caps. It is now the cheapest way to pay. I think that was a good move. And so I get questions from the public, I'm on prepayment, is it cheaper, should I move? So I will give you my answer that I give to consumers. If you're going to stay on the price cap, you are better to stay on prepayment. If you can move off the price cap and you're able to engage in the market, there is a whole wealth of competition on direct debit that does not exist on prepayment. So those on direct debit who are willing to switch will pay materially, currently 17% more than those people who are on prepayment meters, even though prepayment meter is cheaper on the price cap. And the length of time it has taken me to explain that to you is an example of the complexity. If we look at mobile and broadband, which I hope you got the report we put out today, we had Ofcom regulation to bring in transparency 2 years ago on the back of above inflation price hikes, that in our examination of 47,000 tariffs shows 75% of people are paying more because of what Ofcom has done than they would have done otherwise. And 99% of people are paying more than if we'd done, and if you'll forgive the phrase, the bleeding obvious, and simply said you cannot raise prices mid-contract above inflation. The obvious solution. Why we don't do the obvious is not obvious, because it's pretty obvious that's what we should have done. If we go for water, I mean, water is a really interesting industry, one with which has competition, no. Privatisation, yes. And the worry is that we have the worst of both worlds when we come to that particular market. And we take the social tariff. I do not understand why the government did not universalise the social tariff. I mean, I take my job, I always look at, and I use this as an example, my job, mass communication. How do you communicate? How do I, on my television show, explain a social tariff? I have to say, if you're on a lower income, you may be eligible for a social tariff. But I'm afraid I can't tell you what a lower income is, because it's different with every water company. In some it's defined by benefits, in some it's defined by income, in some it's defined by an income assessment. So basically my really rough rule of thumb, and I mean, why am I giving a rough rule of thumb, is if you earn under about £26,000, check out if you can get a social tariff. But that's not good enough, because you know what happens? Someone goes and checks it out and they're on £23,000. They're told they're not eligible, and they say to everyone, it's crap. I wasn't eligible, and he told me wrong, because he said go and check. And all I can do is say this is the level at which you should check. So there's a nice, hopefully that gives you a broad spread of the different things going on in different industries where confusion tends to rule, certainly amongst vulnerable customers, and many not so vulnerable. And a big question for you is, how far do you spread the help up the net? You know, do we only look at the very lowest people on means tested benefit, or what about those on low and middle incomes who are struggling with these systems too? I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's an incredibly comprehensive reply in terms of the breadth of the challenge here. And I think it's very interesting that you reference the challenges for vulnerable customers. But clearly, unless somebody makes a full-time job of this, even if you're not vulnerable, I think it's very difficult to navigate what are very complex systems, which you've rightly identified. It'd be helpful to understand to what extent, and you referenced at the beginning, the regulators have done some good things to improve the matter. So it'd be helpful to understand what more do you think they need to do to fix some of these challenges that you are outlining, and obviously there's many more besides.
So on energy, and I think probably worth saying, as you're all politicians, if I would say 2/3 of my mailbag, which I'm one of the few people who probably has one bigger than you, to be honest with you, 2/3 of my mailbag on energy complaints is very simply about the standing charge. The moral hazard that you have to pay £315 a year just to have the facility of having gas and electricity, that we have older people who don't use gas for 2/3 of the year and they're having to pay a daily charge for it, and that people who are lower users, if they reduce their usage, it doesn't make any difference because they're still paying the standard charge. That is by far and away the thing that drives people mad the most. And I always use the analogy, if I go to buy a book from a bookshop, they don't say, sorry, you have to be a member of a club and pay us each month in order to buy a book, because we have fixed costs. I don't have to pay my fixed costs are factored into the price of the book. Why do we have to have fixed costs factored into a daily charge and variable costs factored into a unit rate? The shift could be done, and I was very hopeful with Ofgem. We had long conversations that it was going to bring a dual price cap, a low standing charge higher unit rate and the normal standing charge and lower unit rate, which, and my view was that should be, people who are on the price cap should be automatically shifted to whichever one was beneficial for them based on their prior year's usage, with an opt-out basis if they chose not to. That was stopped, and then it was moved to this system of we're going to allow switchers tariffs and mandate switchers tariffs, which have a lower standing charge. Now, my big problem with that is that doesn't help anybody who's vulnerable, because they're the people who don't switch that the price cap was set up to protect in the first place. So switchers tariff don't help. And then we're going to trial switchers tariffs, and they'll be coming in spring. Haven't seen any yet.
And just to focus on the sort of different types of customers that experience these challenges. I mean, I recently had a constituent who's 85. Excuse me. And out of excuse me, sorry.
Oh dear, water.
Out of nowhere, landed a bill, £575, and it was all to do with the being unable to make smart meter readings, and so they'd made an estimate. It was quite wild considering his energy use, and he had been writing to them only to discover that actually they don't have a postal address, and we're not receiving any of the letters. And that's just one example of clearly a vulnerable customer. That's a disabled 85-year-old. Have you got reflections on the different experiences of different customer groups with some of the particular challenges that you're outlining?
So with a different hat on Money and Mental Health Policy Institute charity, which I chair, we have a mental health accessible audit. And one of the things that we do for mental health, so I have less experience on the physical health side, is the thing to understand is for some people being text is a nightmare. For other people, text is the only way they can communicate. So when you're talking essential service providers, which all of the firms involved in this industries are, we have to start putting how you communicate rules on. I mean, many modern people, they only want digital, and I'm a digital person myself, I would want that. But there are many older, vulnerable people with disabilities of mental and physical health who need different contact mechanisms. We have a host of problems over billing. Billing is incredibly complex, especially in the energy world. We have the issue that you can't be back billed for more than 12 months, and I think Ofgem has been cracking down on that, but I still regularly get people who get in touch with me who've had 2 years of back billing. And if you don't know you can't be back billed for over a year, then you don't know to say, actually, I'm not paying for more than a year because it was your fault. I mean, there are technical rules. If you behaved wrongly, it doesn't matter. But effectively, if they haven't billed you for 2 years and it's their fault, they can't bill you for the longer than 12 months, but people still do get billed. And so surely one would think in this modern digital world, something is systemically going wrong in the companies in the way that we do this. The one final point, just because I'll throw it in when I've got my money and mental health hat on. Let's just take a picture of a physically or disabled person or someone with a mental health problem that is a severe problem, including potentially going into NHS mental health crisis care. So you have named water, so I've got my water company, I've got my energy company, I've got my broadband company. You've also got your mobile company, you've got your bank, you've got your insurer. And let's imagine I'm in a crisis mental health state, I'm having a fundamental anxiety situation, I'm potentially going to be hospitalised. And just to go back, we got to the state, we've had people who come out of NHS mental health crisis care who on the day they get back have bailiffs at their door. So this is not a small issue. And on that point, I have to call up my water company and tell them, I'm sorry, I'm going through a mental health crisis at the moment. And then I have to call my energy company. And then I have to call my broadband provider, my mobile provider, my bank, and my insurer. And these are actually detrimental to my mental health. There is no tell them once system. There is no tell them once database, and there are data privacy issues with all of this that would need to be handled. It could only be done on a voluntary basis. And actually, you're talking 3 different regulators. No criticism of them. They have their remits on this. But we're not just... These issues do not live in isolation of people's finances. They are a subset of everything that people deal with. And we have a fundamentally intransigent system that puts the burden on the vulnerable individual at moments of vulnerability to declare their vulnerability. And it shouldn't be like that in a digital world. I mean, this is the one time where you're actually capable. We need to have a centralised system where you can volunteer to tell them once. And that tell them once should go to all essential service and public service providers, as long as you're happy with that, with data privacy, and it's a voluntary system, not compulsory. And we need to start working that way. And in fact, the fact that you have it done on a tripartite level here is almost a problem in the start.
The risk of only scratching the surface. I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Could I just come back to you on that last point, Martin, if I may? Do you think we should have one unified system for the 3 regulators on total customer indebtedness, so that each of the 3 regulators would then be able to regulate a system on a total debt? Because it makes clear in the report somewhere that if you might be able to pay your energy bill of £500, but if you do, you're then likely to get into debt with your other utilities.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at that. I've looked at it more on the contact basis, so I'm just going to go slightly slow on that. And I would just reiterate, and forgive me, Chair, even if you unified those 3, and I'm going to plead the 5th on, not that you do that in this country, but anyway, on debt, because I haven't looked at it. you're still only scratching the surface. I mean, the worst type of debt in this country is council tax debt. That is the one that you should not mess with. They have ridiculous enforcement powers, and it's far too quickly, and we've got the government to change that coming in next April. They're going to be changing those rules to slow it down a little bit. But you have the whole system of debt, and we have an underfunded debt counselling service in this country that are not joined in and interlinked to everything that is going on. I mean, we've got representative of someone who does brilliant work on that and has it over there with Citizens Advice on my right here. And so I think even if that were to work, and I'd need to do my thinking, it's not unified enough for me, for the vulnerable individual at a point of crisis. And the funny thing is, the only time we do this well is when someone's died. Mm-hmm. And maybe we should perhaps do it better while people are alive.
No, I accept that. I accept that I did say in my opening remarks, just water and energy, the two of them have reached the total debt of 7.2 billion. So we're getting into some pretty big figures here. Could we then please perhaps go to Rachel?
Yes, of course. So going back to what Ofwat and Ofgem aren't doing to help out vulnerable customers, what more do you think they could do in terms of awareness to make people aware of the financial support and social tariffs among potentially eligible consumers? Because as a Member of Parliament, I have people coming to my surgeries, and even I mean, that sounds very grandiose, doesn't it? Even I am not aware of where there is support from whom and at what levels.
May I take that one?
Yeah, that is for you, sorry.
Okay.
Lewis.
Funny, I was talking to Dom on one of my team who's behind me before, and we were talking about, he went onto a water company site as he was doing some research on the back of this. Do you know what your equivalised income is? Because I don't know what my equivalised income is, but that's what you're asked. If you have an equivalised income, was that the phrase, Dom? Yeah. Equivalised income. I suspect none of us in the room know what our equivalised income is.
What does it mean?
I still don't know. That's the phrase that was one of the water companies for whether you're entitled to a social tariff or not. If your equivalised income is below X amount. Now, I know exactly. So, and the point I'm making is, well, if none of us in this room know what that means, and I don't know what that means, then I think it's probably not a good way to communicate it to vulnerable people.
Is that because they don't want to establish what it means, because they don't want to offer up the potential help?
I tend to think it's because they're crap at communicating.
I tend to agree.
I tend to think this isn't conspiracy; it's just crap. But I also think
again, Mr. Lewis.
Pardon?
Come again, we like straight talkers here.
But I think that what the regulator could do is crack down on crapness, if you like, if I'm allowed to keep saying the word. And I don't see why. I mean, I've had this in so many different sectors. We've had it recently with councils that they weren't explaining when you're entitled to the SMI discount correctly, and different websites were doing it, and it was a third of councils all had it wrong on their websites. Now, there aren't as many water companies. So in terms of you could start by a communications audit of how these water companies are communicating the social tariffs. Far better if they all had the same social tariff. We could have centralised, really good communication. Then I could go on the telly, and lots of other people could, and tell the whole country exactly how it works without having to simply say check, and then you check and it's equivalised income. Broadband. So according to Policy and Practice, 3.8 million households are missing out on water social tariffs. It's just outrageous. Broadband, 7.5 million households, though some cases broadband social tariffs aren't as good as the competitive tariffs out there if you're prepared to switch and switch again. What I find interesting on this, and I'm not doing this as a rent-seeking thing, I made sure that we have social tariffs in MoneySavingExpert's broadband comparison. And we ask you if you're on certain benefits, and then we include it if you are, and we don't include it if you're not likely to be eligible. I believe we're the only comparison that does have social tariffs in, because of course social tariffs don't pay. They don't pay lead fees, so that you don't generate any money if somebody switches through that particular mechanism. I think that doesn't seem to be the way to communicate it for me. I would think it should be in every different comparison that goes on there. So I would be putting that one in there. And then on energy, well, I mean, the biggest problem in energy is we don't have a social tariff. We went for a backstop tariff. I call it the pants cap, not the price cap. We went for a backstop tariff that was meant to be so that the people who never switch will not be quite as hideously ripped off as they would be if under a no price cap situation. But now we've moved into a quasi-regulated tariff for 60% of the population. And actually what we should be doing, in energy is we should be defining who are the legitimate victims of competition and who are the illegitimate victims of competition. If you forgive me, and I mean it in a complimentary way, if all of you stay on the price cap and you pay too much because of it, that's your own fault, because you're educated digital natives who are capable of doing that piece of work for yourself, and it is out there. This is if we want a competitive market. I'm agnostic. You could also regulate all prices. It's not a market championing bit. But alternatively, then we have your struggling 90-year-old with dementia who pays more to boil a kettle than I do, because that's how it works, because I, of course, am on a good tariff, as you would expect, and therefore is an illegitimate victim of competition. So even before we get into this, we have never defined who are legitimate and illegitimate victims. And if you're going to work on the method of you have a market-based solution, as I say, I'm agnostic, I'm not championing it, I'm just saying I work within the system that exists, then you have to have price differentials if you want competition, because price differentials are what incentivises people to move from tariff to tariff. And, you know, grab a good tariff at the moment you can when a one-year fix is cheap. So who can do that? Who can't do that? Who should we protect? Who shouldn't we protect? And what we have is a halfway house between a market system and price regulation, and we have the worst of both worlds. So there are some really big systemic problems going on in all these sectors.
Could I ask Anne to answer the question, because I know you come from a slightly more sort of grassroots perspective in terms of the Citizens Advice Bureau?
Yeah, see, we've done quite a lot of work around social tariffs, and the annual report and Martin's absolutely right. Awareness of these tariffs is really low, and take up as well. I think a really big problem is like a lack of standardisation, as Martin said. It makes it really difficult for people to work out what they're entitled to and also to claim it as well. I think in water there was a really critical opportunity to sort of deal with the standardisation. A lot of organisations were calling for a single social tariff, and the Cunliffe Independent Water Commission also recommended this. The government decided not to move ahead with that at this stage. I think that was a really big missed opportunity. And then in broadband, frankly, there's just, it's a voluntary scheme. There's absolutely no incentive for telecoms companies, broadband companies to A, get these right, and B, promote them. They've done very little in terms of promoting these tariffs amongst their customers. There's also a slight issue with broadband social tariffs in that people worry about the speeds and whether those products will be appropriate to meet their needs. So what we're suggesting now that is in broadband, instead of a specific tariff, you could have a voucher for low-income consumers for them to use to offset the cost of a package which actually works for them. I think at the moment it's really difficult for people. I mean, in energy, take-up of the warmer home discount is around 70%. In broadband, it's less than 9%, and we've had them for a number of years now. Citizens Advice was sort of been calling for them to be made mandatory for a long time, but I think at this point the voucher is probably the solution that we would go with for broadband.
Can I just echo on that? So absolutely, with broadband, the problem is the speed. A social tariff might be £20 a month for 75 meg, but if you're a churner and you're willing to switch, you can get £13 a month for 115 meg, lasting a year, and then you'll have to change tariff again. And again, we have criteria totally different with each firm. Usually it's linked to universal credit, but some only give job seekers free broadband for 6 months. So there's no consistency. Therefore, you don't have any competition between firms, and you might have to switch firm to do it. The voluntary scheme, as always would happen with self-regulation, leads to a huge variety and a lack of communication about it. And actually, I haven't heard the voucher idea before. I think it's a very clever one.
Happy to send it to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you